It started with the sound of my father's wrench hitting the concrete floor of Rivera's auto shop, and ended with me standing on the courthouse steps, holding the keys to everything he thought he'd stolen from me. The metallic clang echoed through the garage bay where I'd spent the last 8 years learning that family loyalty was apparently a one-way street, and where I'd just discovered that my own blood had been planning to erase me from the business I'd built with my bare hands. My name is Alex Rivera, and this is the story of how my father tried to hand my life's work to my younger brother on a silver platter, how my family conspired to make me disappear, and how Uncle Tony's old advice about keeping receipts saved not just my future, but destroyed theirs in the most beautiful way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Rivera family auto shop sat on the corner of University Avenue and Maple Street in Riverside, California, its faded blue sign promising honest work since 1987. 3 decades of oil stains had seeped so deep into the concrete that no amount of degreaser could lift them, and the smell of motor oil mixed with my mother's vanilla air fresheners created a scent that meant home to me and prison to everyone else in my family. I was 22 years old and had been working in that garage since I was 14, first sweeping floors and organizing tools, then gradually learning that I had something my father never expected: actual talent. Michael Rivera built his reputation on solid workmanship and fair prices, but I transformed our little neighborhood garage into something special. While other shops were still struggling with basic diagnostic computers, I was teaching myself advanced electrical systems, hybrid technology, and performance modifications that brought car enthusiasts from 3 counties away. The custom restoration work I'd started in the back bay was generating more profit per square foot than the regular repair business ever had, and word was spreading through online forums that Rivera's was the place to go if you wanted your classic Mustang or Camaro brought back to life properly. But my father saw my innovations as complications. When I suggested upgrading our equipment to handle newer European models, he called it wasteful spending. When I brought in a 1967 Chevelle that needed a complete frame-off restoration and quoted the owner $12,000 for the work, he nearly choked on his coffee. "Nobody pays that much for an old car, Alex," he said, shaking his head. "You're getting too big for your britches." 6 months later, when that same Chevelle won Best in Show at the Riverside Classic Car Festival and brought us 5 more restoration contracts, he just grunted and walked away. My younger brother Jordan was studying business administration at UC Riverside, majoring in theories I was applying every day without a textbook. He'd show up at the shop maybe twice a month, usually wearing clothes too clean for actual work, and spend most of his time in the office with Mom going over the books or discussing expansion plans that never seemed to include my input. Jordan could talk a good game about profit margins and customer acquisition strategies, but he couldn't diagnose a misfiring engine to save his life. He could explain market positioning theories, but he'd never stayed late on a Friday night because Mrs. Chen needed her Honda running for work on Monday morning, and we were the only shop that could get the parts in time. Patricia Rivera, my mother, had given up teaching high school English to manage the shop's administrative side when business started growing. She was organized, efficient, and had a way of making customers feel heard, even when we were booked solid for 3 weeks. But somewhere along the way, she'd started treating the shop like Jordan's inheritance rather than the family business we'd all contributed to building. She'd make comments about how proud she was that Jordan was learning the business side of things, how he had such good ideas about modernizing our customer service approach, when I'd point out that I was the one actually implementing most of those improvements while also doing the technical work that made them possible. She'd smile and say something about how wonderful it was that we all had different strengths. The turning point started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. Bob Harrison, who owned the largest auto dealership group in Riverside County, had been watching our custom restoration work and wanted to discuss a partnership opportunity. He was thinking about adding a classic car restoration division to his business and needed someone with proven expertise to run it. The contract he proposed would make Rivera's the exclusive restoration partner for Harrison Motors, guaranteeing us steady, high-end work while giving us access to their commercial accounts and parts network. I'd spent weeks preparing for that meeting, researching Harrison's business model, analyzing how the partnership would affect our workflow, and developing a presentation that showed exactly how we could scale our restoration operation without compromising the quality that made us special. The night before the meeting, I stayed at the shop until nearly midnight, double-checking my numbers and rehearsing my pitch. This was the kind of opportunity that could transform our little garage into a serious player in the regional automotive restoration market. When Bob Harrison walked into our shop the next morning, I was ready. I showed him through our restoration bay, explained our process for documenting and photographing every step of a build, and walked him through 3 current projects that demonstrated our range of capabilities. He was impressed by the 1969 Boss 302 Mustang. We were finishing for a collector in Newport Beach. Asked detailed questions about our parts sourcing and quality control procedures, and spent nearly 20 minutes examining the engine rebuild on a 1971 Plymouth Cuda that had come to us as a rust bucket and was leaving as a show car. But when we sat down in the office to discuss the partnership details, my father did most of the talking. He thanked Bob for considering Rivera's, outlined our shop's history and reputation, and then started discussing how Jordan would be taking over more responsibility in the business side of operations. "My boy's got a good head for numbers," Michael said, nodding toward Jordan, who had shown up just as the meeting started, still wearing his UCR sweatshirt. "He's been working on some ideas for expanding our customer base and improving our profit margins." I watched Bob's expression shift slightly as Jordan started talking about customer relationship management systems and social media marketing strategies. These weren't bad ideas, but they had nothing to do with the technical expertise and hands-on experience that made our restoration work special. Bob had come here because he'd seen our finished cars at shows and heard about our reputation among serious collectors. He wanted to partner with us because of the quality of our actual work, not because we had good Instagram presence. When Bob asked Jordan about his experience with restoration projects, my brother gave a confident answer about project management principles and timeline optimization. It was like watching someone describe swimming techniques who'd never been in the water. Bob was polite, but I could see him glancing around the shop, probably wondering if he'd made a mistake in coming here. That's when I stepped in. I started talking about the technical challenges we'd overcome on recent builds, the specialized tools and techniques we'd developed for working with rare or discontinued parts, and the network of suppliers and specialists we'd built relationships with over the years. I showed Bob our documentation system, explained how we handled insurance claims and owner communications, and walked through the realistic timelines for different types of projects. Within minutes, I could see his interest returning. By the end of the meeting, Bob was talking about specific cars he wanted us to work on and discussing the logistics of how the partnership would function. He shook my hand and said, "Alex, your technical knowledge and attention to detail are exactly what we're looking for. I think this partnership is going to work out very well." After Bob left, I expected my father to be excited about the opportunity. Instead, he seemed uncomfortable. "That went well," he said carefully. But Bob seemed a little too focused on the technical side. Jordan's business background is going to be important for managing this kind of partnership. That afternoon, I overheard my parents talking in the office. "Alex knows the work," my mother was saying, "but Jordan understands business relationships. If we're going to be working with someone like Bob Harrison, we need someone who can speak his language." "The boy's got skill," my father replied, "but he gets too caught up in the details. Jordan sees the bigger picture. He knows how to think strategically." I realized then that no matter how much expertise I brought to the business, no matter how much I contributed to our success, my parents had already decided that Jordan was the future of Rivera's auto shop. My 8 years of learning, building, and growing the business apparently counted for less than Jordan's 2 years of business classes and natural charm with customers. But I had something they didn't know about. Uncle Tony had taught me more than just advanced automotive repair techniques during those summers I'd spent at his shop across town. He'd also taught me about documenting everything, keeping detailed records, and protecting yourself in business relationships. "Family or not," he'd told me when I was 16, "always keep receipts, always have backup plans, and never let anyone take credit for work you can prove you did." Tony had his own falling out with my father 15 years earlier, something about Dad trying to buy out Tony's share of their original partnership for less than it was worth. They hadn't spoken since, but Tony had stayed in touch with me, mentoring me through complex repair challenges and teaching me business lessons my father never thought to share. Most importantly, he'd encouraged me to keep detailed records of every project I worked on, every customer relationship I developed, and every improvement I made to the shop's operations. For the past 3 years, I'd been documenting everything: photos of my work, emails with customers, receipts for tools and equipment I'd purchased with my own money, records of the training courses I'd taken to stay current with new automotive technologies. I had proof of which restoration projects were my ideas, which customer relationships I'd developed personally, and which technical innovations had come from my research and experimentation. I also had something else: a business license and tax ID number for Rivera Custom Restorations that I'd filed as a sole proprietorship 2 years earlier. When I'd started taking on side projects during weekends and evenings, Uncle Tony had insisted I make it official and separate from the family shop. "You're doing specialized work that's different from regular repairs," he'd explained. "Keep it clean, keep it legal, and keep it yours." Most of my restoration clients thought they were working with Rivera's auto shop, but technically, they were contracting with Rivera Custom Restorations, which operated out of the family garage under an informal lease agreement. It was a distinction that had never seemed important until Bob Harrison started talking about exclusive partnerships, and Jordan started positioning himself as the heir apparent to everything I'd built. That evening, I called Uncle Tony and told him about the Harrison meeting and my parents' conversation afterward. He listened without interrupting, then asked a single question: "Do you have contracts and documentation for the restoration work?" When I told him about the business license and the detailed records I'd been keeping, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Alex, you might want to talk to Lisa Martinez. She's the attorney who helped me when your father tried his nonsense 15 years ago. If your family is planning to cut you out of something you built, you need to understand your options before they make their move." The family meeting was called for Sunday afternoon. Patricia made her famous lasagna, the kind she only cooked for special occasions or when she was trying to soften bad news. Jordan came home from campus early, bringing his laundry and a stack of business textbooks that he spread across the kitchen table like props in a play about academic success. Michael had cleaned up more than usual, wearing the button-down shirt he saved for church and important customer meetings. I knew something was wrong when I walked into the dining room and found them all sitting with their hands folded, wearing expressions that reminded me of a jury that had already reached their verdict. The Harrison partnership contract was spread across the table, along with several documents I didn't recognize and a folder labeled Business Transition Plan in my mother's careful handwriting. "Alex," my father began, "we need to discuss some changes in how the shop is going to operate." He explained that the Harrison partnership was a significant opportunity that required more sophisticated business management than we'd needed in the past. Jordan would be graduating in a year with his business degree, and it made sense to start transitioning him into a leadership role so he'd be ready to handle the increased responsibility. "What kind of leadership role?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Jordan will be taking over as general manager," Patricia said, smiling like she was announcing good news. "He'll handle all the business relationships, customer communications, and project management. You'll continue doing what you do best, which is the hands-on restoration work." I looked at the documents spread across the table. The Harrison contract had been modified from what Bob and I had discussed. Instead of Rivera's auto shop being listed as the restoration partner, the agreement showed Rivera Family Enterprises as the contracting entity, with Jordan Rivera listed as the primary contact and business manager. My name appeared in a section labeled Technical Supervisor, as if I was an employee, rather than the person who'd built the restoration program from the ground up. "This isn't what Bob Harrison and I agreed on," I said carefully. Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Bob Harrison is looking to partner with a professional operation, not a one-man show. Jordan understands how to structure these kinds of relationships properly." "I developed the restoration program," I continued, keeping my voice level. "I built the customer relationships. I designed the workflow systems. I created the quality standards that impressed Bob in the first place." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And you'll continue doing that work," Jordan said, speaking for the first time since I'd entered the room. "But managing business partnerships requires different skills. You're amazing with cars, Alex, but you don't have the business training to handle contracts and client relationships at this level." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. My younger brother, who couldn't diagnose a check engine light, was explaining to me that I wasn't qualified to manage the business relationships I'd spent years developing. What about ownership? I asked. What about my stake in the business? The silence that followed was telling. Finally, my father spoke. The shop has always been a family business, Alex. Your mother and I own it, and eventually Jordan will inherit it. Your family, so you'll always have a place here. But ownership is a different matter. I realized then that they'd never seen me as a partner or potential successor. Despite 8 years of contributing to the business's growth, despite developing the restoration program that had tripled our profit margins, despite being the technical expert that customers specifically requested, my parents had always planned to hand everything to Jordan simply because he was younger and had a business degree. This isn't fair, I said, though I knew fairness had never been part of their equation. Life isn't fair, Alex, Michael replied, his voice taking on the edge that meant the discussion was over. Your mother and I have made this decision. Jordan will manage the Harrison partnership and take over business operations. You can continue working here under his supervision, or you can find something else to do with your life. Under his supervision? I repeated. Jordan doesn't know enough about restoration work to supervise anything. He knows enough about business to manage the people who do the work, Patricia said firmly. And he's shown much better judgment about maintaining professional relationships with clients. That last comment was a reference to a situation from 6 months earlier when I'd refused to cut corners on a restoration project after the customer had tried to pressure us into using cheaper, non-original parts. I'd explained that using incorrect components would compromise both the car's value and our reputation, and the customer had eventually agreed to pay for proper parts. But my parents had seen my refusal to compromise our standards as difficult behavior rather than professional integrity. What if I don't agree to this arrangement? I asked. The room went completely quiet. Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Patricia's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Michael's face flushed red, and I could see the vein in his forehead that only appeared when he was truly angry. Then you're an ungrateful brat who doesn't understand what family means, he said, his voice rising with each word. Your mother and I have provided for you, taught you everything you know, and given you opportunities most kids your age never get. And this is how you repay us? By questioning our decisions and acting like you're entitled to something you never earned? I've worked in this shop for 8 years, I said, standing up from the table. I've brought in more than half our revenue for the past 3 years. I've trained myself on new technologies, built customer relationships, and developed systems that made us competitive with shops twice our size. How is that not earning anything? You learned everything on our equipment, in our shop, using our tools, Michael shouted, now standing as well. You think you built something? You didn't build anything. You just showed up and used what we provided for you. Michael, Patricia said quietly, but he was beyond listening. You want to know what you've earned? He continued, his face now completely red. You've earned the chance to work for your brother and learn what real responsibility looks like. You've earned the opportunity to contribute to this family instead of thinking everything revolves around you. But if you can't handle that, if you're too proud to accept your place in this family, then maybe you don't belong here at all. Dad, Jordan said, maybe we should calm down and... No! Michael slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around his attitude. He either accepts this arrangement and starts showing some gratitude for everything we've done for him, or he can pack his things and figure out life on his own. I looked around the table at my family. Jordan wouldn't meet my eyes. Patricia was staring into her coffee cup as if it contained the solution to an impossible problem. Michael was breathing hard, waiting for me to back down the way I had dozens of times before when family discussions had turned into ultimatums. But this time was different. This time they weren't just dismissing my opinions or overruling my suggestions. They were trying to steal my work, erase my contributions, and turn me into an employee in the business I'd helped build. They were betting that I'd rather accept an insulting arrangement than risk losing my family connections. They'd miscalculated. Fine, I said quietly, reaching into my back pocket and pulling out my keys to the shop. I placed them on the table next to the Harrison contract. I'm ungrateful. I'm too proud. I don't understand what family means. So I'll get out and never come back. The silence was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the kitchen wall, the neighbor's dog barking 2 yards over, the distant sound of traffic on University Avenue. No one moved. No one spoke. They'd expected me to fold, to apologize, to accept whatever scraps they were willing to offer in exchange for keeping the peace. Instead, I walked upstairs to my room and started packing. I took my clothes, my tools, my certification documents, and the laptop where I'd stored 3 years' worth of project documentation. I left behind everything that technically belonged to the family: the bedroom furniture, the television, even the jacket I'd bought with my first paycheck from the shop, because it had the Rivera's logo embroidered on the chest. When I came back downstairs with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items, my family was still sitting around the dining room table in shocked silence. The keys I'd left were still sitting next to the contract that would make Jordan the official manager of work he'd never learned to do. "Alex," Patricia said as I headed toward the front door, "you don't have to do this. We can work something out." I stopped and turned back to look at her. "Mom, you just spent an hour explaining why Jordan deserves to control everything I've built and why I should be grateful for the chance to work under his supervision. There's nothing to work out. You've made your choice clear. Where will you go?" she asked. And for the first time since the meeting started, I heard genuine concern in her voice. "I'll figure it out," I said. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time," Michael finally spoke up. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come crawling back when you realize you can't make it on your own." I looked at my father, this man who'd taught me how to change oil and check brake pads, who'd shown me how to read diagnostic codes and rebuild carburetors, who'd somehow convinced himself that teaching me skills made him entitled to own my achievements. "I won't be crawling back," I said. "But you might want to think about how you're going to explain to Bob Harrison why the person he wanted to partner with is no longer part of your operation." Then I walked out of Rivera's auto shop for what I thought might be the last time, carrying everything I owned and leaving behind a family that had just discovered the difference between having a skilled employee and having a partner who could choose to take their expertise elsewhere. The first night was the hardest. Sam Chen, my friend from high school, let me sleep on his couch in the apartment he shared with 2 other UC Riverside students. It was cramped, noisy, and smelled like leftover pizza and energy drinks, but it was also the first place I'd been in years where no one questioned my decisions or treated my contributions as optional bonuses rather than essential value. Sam listened to the whole story without interrupting, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "So what's your plan?" I pulled out my laptop and showed him the files I'd been keeping: customer contracts, project documentation, before and after photos of restoration work, testimonials from satisfied clients, records of parts suppliers and specialist contacts I'd developed relationships with over the years. It was 3 years of proof that Rivera Custom Restorations existed as more than just Alex Rivera working in his father's garage. "I'm going to call Uncle Tony in the morning," I said, "and then I'm going to call Lisa Martinez, the attorney he recommended. If my family wants to cut me out of the business I helped build, they're going to discover that I kept better records than they did." Uncle Tony's garage sat in a converted warehouse in Canyon Crest, surrounded by the kind of automotive projects that made purists weep with joy. Classic muscle cars in various stages of resurrection filled every available space, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with metal polish created an atmosphere that felt more like a cathedral than a workplace. When I called him that Tuesday morning, 3 days after walking out of my family's shop, his response was immediate and decisive. "Bring your documentation and meet me at Lisa Martinez's office at 2 o'clock, he said without preamble. "If what you're telling me is accurate, your family just made a very expensive mistake." Lisa Martinez operated out of a modest office building on Central Avenue, specializing in small business disputes and partnership conflicts. She was Uncle Tony's age, somewhere in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every possible variation of family business drama. When I spread my files across her conference table, she spent nearly an hour reviewing contracts, examining photos, and reading through customer correspondence with the methodical attention of someone who understood that details matter more than emotions in legal proceedings. "Your documentation is excellent," she said finally, closing the last folder. "Most people in family business situations have handshake agreements and verbal understandings. You have written contracts, dated photographs, and a clear paper trail showing the development of Rivera Custom Restorations as a separate business entity." She explained that while my parents owned the physical garage and the general automotive repair business, the restoration operation I'd developed existed in a legal gray area. The customers I'd worked with had contracted specifically with Rivera Custom Restorations, the sole proprietorship I'd established 2 years earlier. The tools and equipment I'd purchased for specialized restoration work were bought with my business funds and registered to my business license. Most importantly, the relationships I'd built with parts suppliers, specialty vendors, and restoration clients belonged to my business, not to Rivera's auto shop. "The Harrison partnership is where this gets interesting," Lisa continued, pulling out a legal pad and sketching a timeline. "Bob Harrison specifically sought out your expertise and your restoration operation. If your family tries to fulfill that contract without you, they're essentially committing fraud by misrepresenting their capabilities." Uncle Tony leaned forward in his chair. "What are Alex's options?" "Several," Lisa replied. "First, we can demand that Rivera's auto shop cease using the Rivera Custom Restorations name and client list, since those belong to Alex's separate business. Second, we can contact Bob Harrison directly and inform him that the person he actually wanted to partner with is no longer affiliated with Rivera's auto shop. Third, if they've already signed the modified contract without disclosing that Alex won't be involved, we can pursue claims for interference with business relationships and fraudulent misrepresentation." I felt something shift in my chest, a mixture of relief and anticipation I hadn't experienced since walking out of that family meeting. For 3 days I'd been questioning whether I'd made the right choice, wondering if I'd thrown away my future over pride and stubbornness. Now I was learning that I hadn't lost everything after all. I'd just been freed from a situation that was legally and ethically questionable. "What's the first step?" I asked. "We send a formal cease and desist letter to Rivera's auto shop demanding they stop using your business name and client information," Lisa explained. "Then we contact Bob Harrison and explain the situation. After that, we see how your family responds and decide whether additional legal action is necessary." That afternoon, I called Bob Harrison from Lisa's office. His assistant put me through immediately, and I could hear the surprise in his voice when I identified myself. "Alex, I was just thinking about calling your shop. Jordan sent over some revised project timelines, but frankly, they don't match what you and I discussed. Is everything all right over there?" I explained the situation as diplomatically as possible. Bob Harrison was a businessman, not a family counselor, and I needed him to understand the professional implications without getting lost in personal drama. I told him that I was no longer affiliated with Rivera's auto shop, that Rivera Custom Restorations operated as a separate entity, and that any partnership agreement he'd signed might not reflect the actual capabilities of the people who would be doing the work. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Bob spoke, and his tone had shifted from surprise to something approaching anger. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said slowly. "The restoration expert I specifically wanted to partner with is no longer part of the operation, but nobody thought to mention this when they sent me a contract revision." "That's correct," I replied. "I wanted you to know immediately so you could make an informed decision about how to proceed." "I appreciate your honesty, Alex." "This puts me in a difficult position, though. I've already committed to some clients based on the capabilities you demonstrated. Can Rivera Custom Restorations handle those projects independently?" It was the question I'd been hoping he'd ask, but actually hearing it still made my heart race. "Yes," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I have all the equipment, supplier relationships, and expertise necessary to complete any restoration project we discussed. The only difference is that I'll be working out of a different facility." "What kind of facility?" I looked at Uncle Tony, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing interest. He gestured toward the warehouse space visible through Lisa's office window. where his own restoration projects filled the bays with American automotive history in various stages of resurrection. I'm partnering with Tony Castellano at Castellano Custom Works, I said, making the decision as I spoke the words. He has a larger facility with specialized equipment for frame-off restorations and paintwork. It's actually better suited for the high-end projects we discussed than my previous location. Bob was quiet for another moment. Tony Castellano? I know that name. He built the 69 Z28 that won the Concours Award at the Los Angeles Classic Car Show 2 years ago. That's him, I confirmed. He's been my mentor for advanced restoration techniques. Interesting, Bob said, and I could hear him flipping through papers. Alex, I'm going to be direct with you. I sought out this partnership because of your technical expertise and attention to detail. If you can deliver the same quality work from Tony's facility, then that's where I want my business to go. Can you handle the projects we discussed? Absolutely. Then consider this conversation a formal termination of any agreement with Rivera's Auto Shop and the beginning of a partnership with Rivera Custom Restorations and Castellano Custom Works. Can you have a revised proposal to me by Friday? After hanging up with Bob Harrison, I sat in Lisa's conference room trying to process what had just happened. In the span of one phone call, I'd gone from being unemployed and homeless to being half of a partnership that had just landed the biggest restoration contract in Riverside County. Uncle Tony was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, and Lisa was already drafting the cease and desist letter that would formally sever my connections with my family's business. This is moving fast, I said, still somewhat stunned by the turn of events. Good business moves fast, Uncle Tony replied. Your family thought they could steal your work and your relationships. Instead, they just handed you the motivation to become their competition. The cease and desist letter was delivered to Rivera's Auto Shop on Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic calls and text messages from my family. I didn't answer any of them. Lisa had advised me to let all communication go through her office until we understood how my family planned to respond to the legal action. Friday morning, I was at Uncle Tony's garage working on the partnership proposal for Bob Harrison when Lisa called with an update. Your father and Jordan showed up at my office an hour ago, she said, amusement clear in her voice. They're claiming you stole their client list and demanding that we withdraw the cease and desist letter. What did you tell them? I explained that client relationships developed by Rivera Custom Restorations belong to Rivera Custom Restorations, not to Rivera's Auto Shop. I also informed them that Bob Harrison has terminated any agreement with their business and contracted directly with your operation. They didn't take it well. That afternoon, Bob Harrison visited Uncle Tony's garage to see our facilities and meet with both of us about the partnership. He spent 2 hours examining our equipment, discussing our capabilities, and reviewing the proposal I'd prepared. The conversation covered everything from paint booth specifications to parts authentication procedures, and Bob asked the kind of detailed technical questions that demonstrated he understood the difference between professional restoration work and basic automotive repair. This is exactly what I was looking for, he said finally, signing the partnership agreement at Uncle Tony's workbench. Alex, your expertise combined with Tony's facility and reputation gives me confidence that we can deliver exceptional results for our clients. The contract was more generous than anything I'd imagined possible. Bob guaranteed us 40 hours of billable work per week for the first year, with additional projects available based on demand. The hourly rate was 30% higher than what Rivera's Auto Shop charged for regular repair work, and we retained the right to take on independent restoration projects as long as they didn't conflict with Harrison Motors' commitments. Uncle Tony insisted that the partnership be structured as an equal split, despite my concerns about contributing less capital to the operation. You're bringing the client relationships and specialized expertise, he explained. I'm providing the facility and equipment. The work we do together will benefit both of us equally. That evening, Sam helped me move my belongings from his apartment to the small office space above Uncle Tony's garage that would serve as my temporary living situation. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a kitchenette, a private bathroom, and enough space for a bed and desk. More importantly, it was mine, earned through my own work, rather than dependent on family approval or conditional acceptance of unfair arrangements. As I unpacked my tools and set up my workspace, I couldn't help thinking about the conversation that had led to this moment. My father had accused me of being ungrateful and entitled, of not understanding what family meant. But I was beginning to realize that real family relationships are built on mutual respect and appreciation, not on one person's achievements being appropriated by others who happen to share the same last name. The first Harrison Motors restoration project arrived the following Monday, a 1970 Plymouth Cuda that had been sitting in a barn for 30 years, covered in dust and filled with the dreams of its elderly owner who could finally afford to have it properly restored. The car was a numbers-matching example with the original 446-pack engine, but decades of neglect had left it in need of complete mechanical and cosmetic restoration. Working with Uncle Tony on that project reminded me why I'd fallen in love with automotive restoration in the first place. It wasn't just about repairing damaged components or making old cars look new again. It was about understanding the engineering and craftsmanship that had gone into creating these machines, respecting the history they represented and bringing them back to life with the same attention to detail their original builders had invested. Uncle Tony's approach to restoration work was methodical and thorough. Every component was photographed before disassembly, cataloged according to condition and restoration needs, and researched to ensure that any replacement parts met original specifications. His paint booth was equipped with modern spray systems and environmental controls that could produce show-quality finishes. And his machine shop had the tools necessary to rebuild engines and transmissions to better than factory standards. The difference between a good restoration and a great restoration, he explained as we stripped the Cuda down to its bare shell, is in the details that nobody sees. Anyone can make a car look nice from 10 feet away. But a real restoration means that every bolt, every gasket, every wire is correct for that specific year and model. Working in that environment with proper equipment and unlimited time to do things correctly, I realized how much I'd been compromising my own standards while working under my family's business model. Rivera's auto shop operated on volume and efficiency, turning cars around as quickly as possible to maximize profit per bay. Uncle Tony's operation focused on quality and authenticity, taking whatever time was necessary to achieve results that would satisfy the most discriminating collectors and judges. The Cuda restoration took 6 weeks to complete, and when we fired up that 446-pack engine for the first time, the sound was pure automotive poetry. Bob Harrison brought the owner to see the finished car on a Saturday morning, and the old man actually cried when he saw his teenage dream car restored to better condition than when he'd first bought it 50 years earlier. "This is what I was hoping for," Bob told us after the owner had driven away in his reborn muscle car. "This level of craftsmanship and attention to detail is going to make Harrison Motors the premier destination for serious collectors in Southern California." Word spread quickly through the classic car community about the quality of work coming out of Castellano Custom Works. By the end of our second month in partnership, we had restoration projects booked 4 months in advance, and Bob was fielding inquiries from collectors as far away as San Francisco and Las Vegas. My decision to leave Rivera's auto shop was looking better every day. But my family wasn't ready to let things end quietly. The first sign of trouble came when I drove past the old shop on my way to pick up parts at our supplier downtown. Jordan was in the parking lot talking to 2 men in suits, pointing toward the garage bays and gesturing animatedly. One of the men was taking notes, and the other was photographing the building and signage. That evening, Lisa called with disturbing news. "Your family has hired an attorney," she said. "Gerald Hoffman, who specializes in business litigation. He's claiming that you stole trade secrets and client information when you left Rivera's auto shop." "What kind of trade secrets?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "According to their filing, you took proprietary restoration techniques, client contact information, and business processes that belong to Rivera's auto shop. They're seeking an injunction to prevent you from using any knowledge or relationships you gained while working for their business." I thought about the irony of my family claiming ownership of restoration techniques I'd taught myself through independent research and practice, client relationships I'd developed through my own professionalism and expertise, and business processes I'd created to improve their operations' efficiency and quality. They were essentially arguing that everything I'd learned or accomplished while working in their garage belonged to them permanently. How strong is their case? I asked. Weak, Lisa replied confidently. Trade secret protection requires that the information actually be secret, that it provide competitive advantage, and that reasonable efforts were made to keep it confidential. Your restoration techniques are based on widely available technical information and industry best practices. Your client relationships were developed through your individual interactions and expertise. And Rivera's Auto Shop never had you sign a non-compete agreement or confidentiality contract. So what happens next? We respond to their filing with our own documentation showing that Rivera Custom Restorations was always a separate business entity, that your expertise was self-developed rather than proprietary to Rivera's Auto Shop, and that your client relationships belong to you personally. Then we wait for a judge to sort through the legal arguments. The legal battle stretched on for 3 months, during which my family's attorney filed motion after motion, seeking to restrict my business activities. They claimed I was using confidential customer information, competing unfairly with my former employer, and violating implied agreements about family business loyalty. Each filing required a response from Lisa. Each response cost money I was barely earning despite the success of my partnership with Uncle Tony. The stress of ongoing litigation was affecting my work and my sleep. I found myself second-guessing every interaction with clients, wondering if my family's lawyer would somehow twist normal business communications into evidence of improper conduct. Uncle Tony tried to reassure me that we were in the right and that truth would eventually prevail, but the uncertainty was exhausting. The turning point came when Gerald Hoffman overreached in his legal strategy. In an attempt to prove that I'd stolen confidential information, he subpoenaed my business records, client communications, and financial documents. But when Lisa provided those records during the discovery process, they actually strengthened our case rather than weakening it. My documentation showed clearly that Rivera Custom Restorations had been operating as a separate business entity for 2 years before I left Rivera's Auto Shop. The client contracts were written specifically between customers and my sole proprietorship, not with the family business. The restoration techniques I used were based on training courses I'd paid for myself, technical manuals I'd purchased with my own money, and research I'd conducted during my own time. Most damaging to my family's case was the financial analysis Lisa's forensic accountant prepared. It showed that Rivera Custom Restorations had generated more than 60% of Rivera's Auto Shop's total profit over the past 2 years, despite my family treating the restoration operation as a minor sideline to their regular repair business. I had essentially been subsidizing their general automotive repair operation while building a specialized business they now claim to own. Your family's attorney has made a critical error, Lisa explained after reviewing the discovery materials. By demanding access to your business records, he's opened the door for us to demonstrate not only that you operated independently, but that your family was actually dependent on your success for their own financial stability. The final court hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in early December. Judge Patricia Romano had reviewed all the submitted documents and legal briefs, and she'd scheduled just 2 hours to hear oral arguments from both sides before making her ruling. My family arrived at the courthouse with Gerald Hoffman and a briefcase full of documents that supposedly proved their ownership of my work and relationships. Michael wore his best suit, the one he'd bought for my high school graduation, and Patricia carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who expected the legal system to validate her sense of entitlement. Jordan looked uncomfortable, probably realizing that their legal strategy was based more on emotion than evidence. Gerald Hoffman's presentation focused on family loyalty, traditional business relationships, and the supposed unfairness of an employee competing with his former employer. He argued that I owed my family compensation for the training and opportunities they'd provided, that my success was built on their investment in my development, and that allowing me to compete freely would encourage other employees to steal business from their employers. Lisa's response was methodical and fact-based. She presented the business license documentation showing Rivera Custom Restorations as a separate entity, the client contract specifying my business as the service provider, and the financial records demonstrating my independent operation. She explained that I hadn't been an employee of Rivera's Auto Shop in any legal sense, but rather an independent contractor who happened to work out of their facility under an informal arrangement. Judge Romano asked pointed questions about the nature of my relationship with Rivera's auto shop, the ownership of tools and equipment used for restoration work, and the specific business processes my family claimed as trade secrets. Gerald Hoffman's answers were vague and theoretical, while Lisa provided specific documentation and legal precedents supporting our position. The hearing concluded with Judge Romano announcing that she would issue a written ruling within 1 week. That week felt longer than the entire 3 months of litigation that had preceded it. I continued working on restoration projects with Uncle Tony, but I couldn't fully concentrate on anything, knowing that my entire future was in the hands of someone I'd never met before that Friday morning in court. The ruling arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Lisa called me immediately after receiving the court documents, and the excitement in her voice was unmistakable. "We won," she said simply. Judge Romano ruled that Rivera Custom Restorations is and always has been your separate business entity, that your client relationships belong to you individually, and that Rivera's auto shop has no legitimate claim to your expertise or business processes. She's also awarding us attorney's fees, which means your family will be paying for our legal costs. I sat down heavily in the chair beside Uncle Tony's workbench, feeling 3 months of tension drain out of my body all at once. "So it's over?" "It's over," Lisa confirmed. "Your family's attorney has 30 days to appeal, but Judge Romano's ruling is so thorough and well documented that any appeal would likely be unsuccessful. You're free to operate your business without interference." Uncle Tony clapped me on the shoulder and grinned. "Congratulations, partner. Now let's get back to building cars instead of building legal cases." That evening, I drove past Rivera's auto shop for the first time since the court hearing. The parking lot was empty except for my father's pickup truck, and the building looked smaller somehow, less significant than the monument to family tradition I'd always imagined it to be. There was a sign in the window advertising general automotive repair services, but no mention of custom restoration work or classic car specialization. I didn't stop or go inside. There was nothing left for me there, no conversations that needed to happen or relationships that could be repaired. My family had made their choice when they tried to steal my work and erase my contributions. The legal system had validated my right to build my own future, but the real victory was in discovering that I didn't need their approval or acceptance to succeed. 3 weeks later, Bob Harrison called with news that would transform our operation completely. "Alex, I've been talking with some other dealers about the quality of work you and Tony are producing," he said. "There's interest in expanding this restoration partnership across multiple locations. Would Rivera Custom Restorations and Castellano Custom Works be interested in discussing a regional franchise opportunity?" The opportunity Bob described involved partnering with Harrison Motors locations throughout Southern California, providing restoration services for their classic car customers while maintaining our independence and quality standards. It was the kind of business growth I'd dreamed about but never imagined possible while working under my family's limited vision and local focus. "We'd be very interested," I told Bob, looking around Uncle Tony's garage at the 6 restoration projects currently in progress. "When can we discuss the details?" Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.